Good evening, everyone, and welcome to part 2 of this evening's event, where we have our candidates for City Council for the City of Allentown in the room. I will introduce them: Cece Gerlach, Joshua Siegel, Courtney Robinson, Joe Hoffman, Candida Affa, John Rosario, and Luis Acevedo. We'll start this evening's conversation with a question to all of our candidates. You'll be given 2 minutes to respond to what are your campaign's priorities, your 3 campaign priorities. You'll each be given 2 minutes, and we have our timekeeper sitting on the front row who will inform you if you go over. Yes, beginning with Ms. Gerlach.
Is this on? Okay. So hello, thank you for spending your evening with us tonight. This is a local election, and we know local politics matter, so thank you for caring and taking time out of your evening. Thank you to Pastor Edwards for hosting this event. So we all know that the City of Allentown needs to refocus on working class people, working class neighborhoods. Skyscrapers are pretty to look at. Arenas are fun to visit if you can actually afford to go into them. But we know that's not going to change Allentown. That's not going to transform communities. That's not going to uplift people. We need to implement policy, bold policy with progressive leadership that will actually transform lives. I'm talking about community benefits agreements. I'm talking about tackling the homeless crisis. We have over 1,000 homeless kids in the Allentown School District. Several blocks from here, we have people sleeping in tents. Several blocks from billions of dollars in investment, there are people sleeping outside. Are we okay with that? Thirdly, the neighborhoods. The neighborhoods are in despair. We need to increase home ownership. We need to actually enforce the city's building codes, and I would go even further and actually raise the standard for the landlords. Those are my 3 areas: homelessness, neighborhoods, and community benefits. It's about people, regular working class people, not putting money and profits into a handful of a few folks in Allentown. Meanwhile, the rest of Allentown, 99% of us, are forgotten about.
Thank you. Mr. Siegel.
So again, Greg Edwards, thank you so much for hosting this event, and I can't echo what Cece said enough. This is by far perhaps the most important election that Allentown's ever had, and it's so critical that you're here today to hear what we stand for. When I started my campaign, what I talked about was the all-American city vision, and that means that we have to be a city that aspires to be the best any city in the country can be. And my first priority on day 1, and we've experienced it this year with the 27% property tax increase, is finding creative, alternative, and inventive ways of raising revenue that protect our fixed income and low income residents from the financial burden, that find ways to make sure that the people that can afford to pay their fair share do. More importantly, we need to also address the housing stock in Allentown and housing in general. That means both the affordability crisis that we're currently experiencing in the city. Allentown's had a 22% increase in rent in just the last 3 years alone, and 71% of low-income renters are rent burdened, which means they spend more than 30% of their annual income on rent. We're hurting the people that live paycheck to paycheck, the working class, working people that make this city thrive and prosper every day. It's also a matter of the quality of housing stock, with over 1,000 bladed structures in Allentown, many of them residential, that deteriorate and destroy our neighborhoods, deprive them of the safety that our residents and citizens deserve, that make streets unsafe for children to play in. We have slumlords and landlords that need to be held accountable, that need to be held to the highest possible standard. And we also have a housing crisis and related to the people that don't have any housing, the chronically homeless. And I support a Housing First initiative because I believe that housing is a prerequisite to health and mental well-being and any form of recovery in the long run. And finally, what we need is quality, inclusive economic development, not just money for money's sake, not just buildings for the sake of building buildings, but economic development that enfranchises, that empowers, and provides every family that gets a job in this city a family-sustaining wage, a decent living, and an opportunity to contribute and be a part of the city's revitalization. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Robinson.
Thank you very much. First and foremost, I would just like to say thank you to Pastor Edwards for hosting us this evening, and also thank you to the Coalition for Economic Dignity for putting this entire event together. You know, unfortunately, this is one of only 2 events that have been held throughout this election season so far, where there's been an opportunity for all of us as candidates for City Council to be here in front of you. So I just want to say thank you for that. I was elected to council 2 years ago, so I've been serving now for a little more than 1 year. And in that time, I have tried to keep the one and only promise that I have ever made, or will ever make, which is accessibility, to be available for people, whether it's the countless community meetings that I try to attend every month, whether it's having a phone conversation, an email, speaking with someone after they've come to council about an issue. I've always tried to be accessible, and I always will try to be accessible. As far as my priorities for this election, they're very similar to what the priorities I had when I ran 2 years ago, because there's a lot of work that still needs to be done. First and foremost, fiscal responsibility has to be one of our top priorities, if not our top priority. We can't accomplish anything else if we don't have an honest fiscal picture of what the city is and are on the right fiscal footing. I supported the tax increase this year not because I thought it was fun, not because I thought, well, why not, but because it was absolutely the most necessary thing to do. It's not wise for someone who's running for office to vote for a tax increase, but I took that on and I did it because it was the right thing to do and a hard choice I would make. Our housing stock is also something we have to work towards. We've made great strides in the past year towards refurbishing our housing stock, but we need to keep going and keep doing more and come up with newer policies. And we also need to work towards making sure that development in the city encompasses not just all of our geographical areas, but as was stated earlier, encompasses all of our citizens. That everyone in this city has the opportunity to succeed if they want to try. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Hoffman.
Thanks, Pastor, and thanks everybody for sticking around. I know that with a mayor debate before us, there's a temptation to kind of get back to the rest of your evening, but I appreciate that you're all still here. My name's Joe Hoffman. I'm candidate for Allentown City Council. I have 3 principal points that I've been saying since February 11th, and I'll say until November the 5th. First, my 40 years of grant experience and my ability to raise $75 million for communities throughout eastern Pennsylvania will be brought to work here. The goal is simple. By raising money from non-tax, non-fee sources of revenue, you will no longer have to rely solely on taxes as the answer to your revenue problems. We need to get to the point where we're not raising taxes, where we're actually trying to lower them in some cases, and above all else, not take your money in the first place. Second, I pledge to establish a Millennial Leadership Council comprised of residents of this city ages 21 to 39 to train them to be the next generation of leaders, to fill council positions and mayor positions and controllers and all the other elected and appointed positions that there are. However, to also train them to become members of city staff. And finally, my third goal, which I have already started, is to help the near homeless and the homeless secure the funds they need to enable them to live a life of dignity and peace. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Hoffman.
Thank you. And thank you all for coming. I'm Candida Affa. I'm a councilwoman for the past 3 years. The 3 points that I have for tonight, basically the very first one, I've always been #1 priority is public safety. I think public safety is the #1 thing that every citizen really wants. And I think by doing that, we touched on community policing and so on and so forth, but I think one of the things is extensive training. We need to train our officers in diversity, if they're getting promotions. There are so many things in the police department, and hiring a lot more diversity, which we have. The 8 policemen, out of the 8 policemen we have, I believe there's 1 that speaks Arabic, 3 Spanish, so we are working toward that. And so that's one of my priorities, is training for the police department and public safety. The second one is blighted property. I'm on the board of blighted property for the past 8 years, I believe. And I would like to see our blighted property stock be redeveloped for affordable housing. And that is affordable housing for ownership. We have so many beautiful homes out there. We do go after the landlords. That's a misconception that we don't. It's a process. We go after the landlords. We do take them back. And what I'd like to see when we take back these homes, to redevelop them into affordable housing. The last thing is, it's something way off that nobody else has brought up, but I believe someone on the dais said something about communication. I would like to open up the lines of communication for everyone in Allentown by using Access TV, so that you can turn your television on and see this will be in City Council, all our council meetings and all important meetings. I think that's very important because there's a lot of people that don't know the procedures and policies of the city. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Resurrected.
Good evening. Thank you, Pastor. Thank you, everyone, for being here this evening. My 3 topics this evening are housing, security, and the financial crisis that is crippling our city right now. I am a small business owner on 7th Street right here for 26 years. I run a successful business. I am a real estate professional, and as such, I have a couple of ideas about blighted properties in Allentown. And blighted properties are no more than tax shelters for landlords to balance their federal taxes. And as an accounting professional, I can tell you that I have had clients come to my office asking me to how they can balance their federal tax liability with blighted properties. So it is a crisis that we have in Allentown. I will tell you that I am exposed to the need of housing that we have in this city. 3 weeks ago, I posted an apartment for rent for $850 in the south side of Allentown. And I had, within 24 hours, 52 applications. And for anybody who is not exposed to this type of debacle in our city, it's a major problem. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Azevedo.
First, I want to say thank you to Edward Pastor for inviting me here today and everyone for coming down. My 3 points are the following. Policing is definitely #1 priority for me. Public safety, we need to make sure that our police officers have all the resources they need to get the jobs done successfully. We need to upgrade our cameras, body cameras for the officers, so there would be no conflicted information of what incident happened out there. I mean, as you all know what's going on with police officers in our community, we cannot afford to have that in Allentown. We need to get grants to upgrade their body cameras. Like I said, we need to hire more officers. We are short of officers in Allentown. We need to concentrate on high crime areas, but not to forget the low crime areas. If we put new cops in one area, we gotta make sure that the low crime areas, we also concentrate on them too. Why? Because if we don't, the criminals are gonna move to that area, and then we're gonna have the same problem we have in one section, they're gonna move to the other section. The other problem we have is affordable housing. That's a big problem in the city of Allentown. Most of the Allentown residents are minimum wage worker, can't even afford a studio, which is close to $978 in Allentown downtown. Downtown is becoming like New York City. I moved from New York City over here, and I can see what happened in New York is coming here to the Allentown area. The next thing is that I didn't hear in the table today is development for youth. Our youth are our future. I'm president of Mountain Dew Memorial Little League, and I tell you, we have problems in our association, and I don't see the city helping us in many different ways. We need to step up to the plate and make sure that we are there for our youth, because our youth are our future. They are our future candidate. They could be our future president. They could be our future mayor. They could be our future council members.
We're gonna have to leave it. Thank you.
Thank you. Will you give the candidates a round of applause for their opening comments before we get to the substantive talk? You all have received instructions on tonight's debate. There are 7 of you, unlike the last one. We're going to ask that you make your points very clear and succinctly. And the way we're going to do this is direct each question to 1 or 2 of you, and each of you will get an opportunity to rebut. Please keep in mind a rebuttal is not an agreement, just for policy's sake, okay? So this first question is directed to Mr. Locke and Mr. Siegel. Substandard rental units are a threat to both the tenant and the broader community. If elected, what specific policies will you enact to ensure rental properties stay safe and dignified? Mr. Locke.
Okay, so first off, we need to enforce systematic inspections of units. What that would mean is those landlords, or slumlords we should call them, who have time and time again, they have violation after violation. We need to target those landlords. We need to make sure that we are citing them, fining them, and when necessary, taking them to court. And I can pretty much guess everyone up here is going to agree with that. So I'll give you something else then. The other point is, instead of enforcing housing codes, we need to enforce building codes. That's what I'm talking about by raising the standard, increasing the expectation of landlords. So the difference between housing codes and building codes, housing codes, enforcing those enable a landlord to slap some paint over something on the wall, and then the inspector comes in, everything's okay. I know of someone, one of my clients, who has a hole in her floor, but the landlord put plywood over it and then put a rug over it, it passed inspection. Those are housing codes. Building codes make sure that there's firewalls. Building codes make sure that there's a strong foundation, that there's a skeleton, that the people can actually live and survive and be healthy and thrive in those environments. So that's what I would do.
Thank you. Mr. Siegel.
Well, first and foremost, I think we absolutely have to switch to a point-based inspection system that rewards good landlords and punishes bad ones. I know you've seen it on the board all day, so that's sort of a repeat point. What I really want to emphasize, and it's an innovative and unique law here in Pennsylvania, it's called the conservatorship law. It was not written all that long ago, but what it essentially allows is nonprofit entities, or sometimes community organizations, the people to come together and basically be the primary suitor and take landlords and slumlords to court and have the deed of their house transferred, in many instances, to a nonprofit entity that then becomes, as the law suggests, a conservator over that property. And then they, from there, can redevelop it in a responsible and productive manner. It's an effective way to, 1, incentivize landlords and slumlords to abide by the rules, but it also sets a zero-tolerance policy. It lets people know that if they come into this community and they purchase houses, and they think that they're going to let the building codes and the house go to hell, they're going to let it absolutely fall apart. They understand that the city has absolutely no tolerance for that, and it's an effective, cost-effective means of actually procuring that property, getting it back on the tax rolls, and making sure that it's in the hands of a responsible tenant, a responsible landlord who's actually going to make the necessary improvements, and make sure that that property remains affordable in perpetuity, which is another problem. We need to make sure we combine, in a mutually beneficial manner, not just the revitalization of properties in the city, but making sure that when those properties are revitalized, they stay within the hands of someone who's going to value that property in perpetuity. They're going to value that property's affordability in perpetuity. And more importantly, yes, we do need more building inspectors, and we need a stronger standard. For example, we should look at the fact that right now, if there's a rodent infestation or a cockroach infestation in apartments, it's actually the individual who lives in the home's responsibility to abate and get rid of those rodents as opposed to the landlord. So we have to review in every possible and conceivable fashion, are we putting too much of a stress and too much of a burden on a tenant who may very well be cash-strapped and incapable of making some of these necessary changes and refinements that should fall on the landlord's shoulders because they're the one who's supposed to maintain that property, they're the one who's taking that responsibility by procuring it. We shouldn't be forcing that on people that are least able to pay and least capable of making that expense.
Thank you, Mr. Siegel. Let's say the rest of you, is there a rebuttal to what they said regarding zoning or housing or something that you would like to add?
Yes, I'd like to add, hello, yes, okay.
It's fine.
Yes, I have the experience of having some landlords actually from New York City who come to Allentown and buy properties and actually try to rent them. Some of those properties are run down, and we understand that there is a business side of this in terms of cost. People try to have properties that may not be in the best of conditions and actually try to make money out of them. I have clients who have 15 properties. They live in New York City. They own about 15 properties in Allentown. And so I believe that going back to a point system where we actually hold these people responsible for their actions in terms of the dilapidated properties, may be a good way to go.
Thank you, Mr. Rosario. I believe Mr. Robinson grabbed the mic. Yes, please.
Thank you, Pastor Edwards. In agreement with the points-based system is something we absolutely need to do, and it's being looked into now. But in addition to that, one of the biggest problems that we have in this city is the fact that we are not effectively using technology. Our inspectors, whether it be to go out and look at construction of a new building or inspect rental units, are still using paper reports when they go out. And they're handwriting all their notes, they're handwriting the inspection, and then they have to come back and enter those reports into our system. We need to look at a technologically based system that allows them to make those reports in real time. It is far easier to follow and track those issues and hold property owners accountable when we have easy and accessible data to do it. It also will then make it easy to have the data accessible for everyone in the public to see who a good landlord is and who a bad landlord is.
Thank you. Ms. Alfa or Mr. Acevedo?
Yes, I'd like to. I agree with Mr. Robinson. It makes it very difficult for our inspectors. Being on the blighted property, I have to tell you, it's a process. It's a long process. We do go after landlords. First, the inspectors come in, then they're reg tagged, and then they come to us. And last time we had, was just last week, was 36 homes, and we do go after these landlords. We prosecute them, we do everything we can, and the last process, of course, is trying to take the property away from them. So we're out there, we're trying, but it is a long process. It's not easy. But what Mr. Robinson said, I think would make things easier. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Acevedo?
Well, I gotta agree with the whole panel here. These homes that are out here, they're unattractive and they're out of date. Some of them poses health issues. Some of them poses occupants hazards, neighborhood, and visitors. We need to find a solution. We need to find financial help. We need to identify these homes, and we need to go after these landlords and slumlords, like we call them. Affordable home does not mean that a tenant needs to live in a dangerous situation. And a lot of these affordable homes are dangerous situations.
Thank you. The second question is directed to Mr. Robinson and Mr. Hoffman, with the rest of you who can add on or rebut as you see fit. So Allentown is facing between a $4 and $5 million structural deficit through 2022. And by all circumstances has almost no ability to do any long-term borrowing. If re-elected or elected, how will you address the city's dire financial situation? Mr. Robinson?
Thank you. First and foremost, I think that council, the administration need to work together, and we are working together, to establish a sound financial footing. One of the biggest problems that we had over the last 10 years in this city was that there was the ability to not raise taxes because information was not being shared in an easy manner or in a quick manner. The budgets were being held until the absolute last minute of their deadline. There were also little games being played to prevent money from being spent so it could be transferred. We need to close those loopholes. And one of the first and best ways to do that is to make sure that all of the data is available, not just for members of council and for people involved, but the general public. And in an easy way. We can't just have something where data is just dumped onto a website where someone has to sift through it. We need to identify ways so that it is very quick and very easy for every citizen in Allentown to know how our tax dollars are being spent. A very simple thing that we can do that would be easy is a pie chart on the front of the website for the city that states of your tax dollars. We can take $1 and say, X number of cents goes to public safety, X number of cents goes to retirement benefits, X number goes to healthcare benefits. These are things that we can do that will make it more accessible and easy. I went out, I try to attend every community meeting every month, especially block watches and crime watch meetings. And I had a very interesting thing happen once the budget was announced. I expected that I was going to get a lot of flack when I talked about the budget and why I was supporting the budget. And I actually only had, in all of those crime watch meetings, 2 people out of the probably close to 200 that I spoke with. And in coming to city council, a very few that talked about how the tax increase was not warranted. People understand that government services cost money. having the ability to be honest with everyone is going to help us towards building a financial future that is solvent for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Hoffman.
Multi-million-dollar structural deficit, find money from somewhere else. I will tell you again, after working for 40 years in the grant community and raising the kind of money I've been able to raise, I am very confident that we could make a significant dent in the financial deficit by simply going over the budget, finding items that are susceptible to raising revenue from outside sources, and aggressively going to get them. I actually have a question kind of based on this. I'm not sure how it'll fit into our discussion here, but regardless of who wins this election in November, there's going to be one more municipal budget under the existing mayor and the existing council. And if you really want to know answers to how we're going to fix the structural deficit, the first question is simple. Are we going to have another tax increase? We have 2 sitting council people now who are going to help make that decision, so they have to at least have preliminary thoughts on, are we going to have it? If so, how much? And what can be done now to stop it?
Thank you. So I'm hearing accessibility of information, education of the community around where our money currently is going, and also sourcing external finances. Let's hear the rest of you.
Are we going on that?
Yes, you can rebut now. Yes.
Okay. So, what we have in Allentown right now, and what we have had for these past 20 years, we have made devastating mistakes to the economy of this city. I will give you one example. If you walk around Linden right now, we have a parking deck. A parking deck designed only to park cars. I have a problem with that. As a real estate professional, I look at the first floor of those buildings. You don't have one single office space. You don't have one single store in the first floor, not only on the one on Linden, but block after block after block, the parking authority below those buildings without office space and retail space on the first floors. We lost a tremendous tax base in Allentown.
Thank you, Mr. Rosario. Others of you?
Will my question get answered?
At the end, perhaps, yes. We have a very robust agenda. So the rest of you, I see Mr. Siegel picking up the mic, please.
I'm glad this question was asked because this is by far the signature plank of my campaign, and I think it's something that demands both political courage and financial ingenuity. And I've been talking to the campaign trail about a number of ways that we can raise revenue in creative and innovative manners. The first one is a pilot program, a payment in lieu of taxes. We're the 3rd largest city in Pennsylvania, and we're one of the few communities that doesn't have an extensive and well-crafted pilot program. For example, in the city of Lancaster, a city half our size, the hospital there contributes $1.3 million annually to the city's general fund. In the city of Providence, Rhode Island, Brown University signed a memorandum of understanding where they delineated that every year they would transfer $3.3 million to their city's general fund as a means of easing the financial anxiety in the community and making the city more self-sufficient. And beyond that, we need to look at what Allegheny County did back in 1995 when they passed a regional asset district that allowed them to generate $3.9 billion over the course of 15 years that they could invest back in their cash-strapped municipalities. In Pittsburgh, much like we would, got 50% of the revenue from that asset district, significantly allowed them to make investments in their community and ease their tax burden.
Thank you. Ms. Gerlach?
Yeah. Yes, in addition to some of the things that Mr. Siegel had pointed out, which are all great ideas. So I happen to serve on the Allentown School Board, and for those of you who haven't paid attention, we're kind of used to deficits. So right now, so last year we actually had a $20 million deficit. We were able to close that by reaching out, by looking for extra revenue streams, by looking for grants, by partnering with people who had our back as a school district. People have our back as a city. We need to reach out to them. So some of the things that Josh had said. Now, what we also have to understand is City Council is given a very small window to actually pass a budget. On the school board, we have from January until June, which means we are able to look at different options such as raising to the maximum or maybe somewhere in the middle. They didn't have that opportunity, so I think we need to extend the budget process.
Thank you. Ms. Allen?
Yes, going back to the 27%, a lot like Mr. Robinson, I've been canvassing door to door, and no one has brought up, and no, I shouldn't say that. If they do bring it up, and I explain one thing, services, services, services. No one wants their services cut. I get somebody thanking me, walking through Wegmans, thank you for the new police officers, 2 new fire trucks, 2 new firemen, things with the EMS. These are the reasons that I voted for this. I will not ever cut services for this city, because they are you're in desperate need of them. You need the fire, you need the police, you need EMS, and that's one of the reasons I voted yes for the 20%. And to answer your question, when you're on council, let's see what you have to say about it when you walk in our shoes next year, if you get elected.
I think your question has been answered, Mr. Hoffman. Mr. Acevedo, if you would like to rebut.
27%. There's other ways that we could bring revenue to our city other than raising taxes. City jobs. Most of our city jobs are residents that don't even live in Allentown. They don't even put back their money back to our city. We need to start requiring, you have to live in the city of Allentown if you want to work for the city. As a police officer, as a fire department, as an EMS worker. We could grandfather in everyone that's in already, but we need to address this problem. It is a problem. In New York City, you got to live in the city to work in a city job. Why a city like Allentown, third biggest city in Pennsylvania, most of our forces don't live in Allentown. They take out money. We pay them their taxes.
Stop there, Mr. Acevedo.
Thank you. This third question was asked at our last mayoral debate, and I need to note that it was the most frequently asked question on our Facebook poll when we were putting together these questions. It's going to be directed to Ms. Alpha and Mr. Rosario, with rebuttal from the rest of you. Allentown has the highest poverty rate of any municipality in the region. Meanwhile, we have very high rents that keep rising astronomically. What is your strategy for affordable housing in the Queen City? Ms. Alpha and Mr. Rosario.
I do believe in affordable housing. But one of the things I believe in is home ownership. I've always believed that this will turn Allentown around. This is what we had in the 60s and 70s, home ownership. This is where people have roots. If we can find a way that people to own their homes, it would change this city dramatically. Like I said, we have the stock of the unaffordable, not the blighted property. I'd like to see developers come in. People develop homes so you can buy them, so you can have roots here, so your children can go to our schools, our tax base. Everything depends on home ownership. And that's one of the things I would really like to work on.
Okay, home ownership. Mr. Rosario.
Okay, I am a real estate professional on 7th Street in Allentown, where I've been for 26 years. I have been exposed to this poverty. I have been exposed to this anguish of our people, of the don't haves, the disadvantaged, the poor, on whom the parking authority has a grip on them, by the way, with all these parking $200 tickets. The national system, the point scoring, the reporting of PPL bill being 5 days late on Mr. Martinez, will keep him in the 525 points range. Mr. Martinez will never be able to qualify. I am sick and tired of trying to qualify people every single day and they don't qualify. How are we going to have these people be homeowners in Center City? We need a different approach. We need a business approach. I think I have the approach, but I ran out of time. Okay, so what we need is community banking. What we need is a different way of thinking, trying to help these people out. Maybe the city can be a guarantor on a loan for $20,000, $30,000, whatever the case may be, to make sure these people qualify. I have a ton of people trying to buy homes right now in Center City, and they don't qualify.
Sounds like a clear line of demarcation between you and Ms. Officer. So we're going to ask Cece Gerlich, she's chomping at the bit for this question.
Okay, so there's a couple ways we address this. Community benefits agreement or ordinance. If we had a community benefits ordinance, that would require large corporations to offer internships for our local people, including our students, which means they actually get a pathway into some of the good paying jobs that are being brought downtown. Inclusionary zoning. Inclusionary zoning will not solve the affordable housing crisis, but it will help mitigate the effects of gentrification. Much of the affordable housing that we used to have was downtown, and it was torn down, and we continue to see rents raised. I live in the neighborhood where the rents are going up, so I know the gentrification is real. They say that there's no numbers, they say there's no data that proves it. I see the empirical data in my own neighborhood. If we can solve gentrification and we can actually pass inclusionary zoning, we will help mitigate some of the affordable housing crisis in Allentown. It takes policy, not hoping, not dreaming.
Thank you. Mr. Siegel.
This is working good, I couldn't tell. All right. I'll just leave that over there. First off, absolutely. I think it's a moral and an unquestionable moral imperative that we class inclusionary zoning. It should be at least 20% of the units set aside. The fact of the matter is, by 2020, there'll be 1,200 luxury apartments unit downtown. What do you think that does to a local real estate market? Of course it raises rents, and they have gone up 22% in the last 3 years alone. The evidence is there, the statistics are clear, the imperative is now, we absolutely need inclusionary zoning. We do have an affordable housing trust fund, but it needs to be supplemented by more than just your tax dollars. The developers who are coming in and increasing rents had better start putting money forward, and that's what a community benefits agreement is all about. Making sure that the community comes together and that they actually set the standard and delineate what they want. And often it does come in the form of developers giving money to the affordable housing trust funds. That money can be used to incentivize the construction of affordable housing in downtown Allentown. Dense, multi-family affordable housing so people can live and work. We're going to have to stop.
Thank you. Mr. Robinson, Mr. Hoffman.
Thank you very much. So, one of the things that we also need to do, and Ms. Gerlach mentioned this, is even if we look at an inclusionary zoning plan, that is not going to solve the problem. That will help solve the problem, but it's not the only issue. We also have an issue of existing housing that is in disrepair, and some of it's affordable and some of it's not. So we need to work towards making the inspections more systematic. The points-based system, as was discussed earlier. The other thing that we need to take into account is, as we are moving forward with stricter rental inspections than we have, because the new administration has prioritized those over what they were in the last administration, there's the potential for housing displacement, because people are now going to be in buildings that are tagged unfit. So we need to identify that. We need to find a way to take care of those people and make sure that they're not being put out on the street while we're trying to solve the problem. You know, there's the rule of unintended consequences. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Jonathan.
As it comes to affordable housing, one of the things that clearly needs to be done is to ease the fee and tax burden on landlords themselves. That is not quite as popular an initiative as other initiatives that you've heard tonight, but it is one that can be implemented quicker and more effectively. Simple math. If I'm a landlord and I have to pay less out of my pocket, I may have a better chance of holding the line or reducing my rental rates. It is definitely something that I would like to see considered before we go to solutions like inclusionary zoning, which I don't think will work yet in this town. Maybe in 5 years, but not now.
Thank you. I think everyone has responded, so thank you. This next question is directed to...
Can I?
Sure, absolutely.
I have to agree with Mr. Rosario on when I talked about home ownership. This is giving the city and the developers incentives for people that can afford it. It's not that It's just an affordable, and you can own this home. We have to give incentives out. I had a friend that moved to Baltimore as a school teacher. They gave him so much incentive to move into that city. He's still living there. And this is like 15 years ago. This is what I'm looking for. Homeownership, incentive, maybe the police department, fire department, they will come back into the city. But with the help of the city with incentives.
Okay, thank you. We have to move on, otherwise we're going to be here rather late. So, speaking of policing, this next question is for you, Mr. Acevedo, and the rest of you can rebut or provide additional clarity. In 2018, Joey Santos was an unarmed man who was killed by a South Whitehall police officer in broad daylight last summer. In light of what happened to Joey, what are you prepared to do about police aggression, particularly against Black and brown residents in the city of Allentown? Mr. Acevedo.
Well, personally, I don't think we have that issue in Allentown, which is a great thing. But one thing, like I said before, we definitely have to have cameras, body cameras, because the body cameras will tell you the whole story, not just partial of the story. That's the most important thing we need.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Others of you, one at a time, please. Yes.
I rebut.
You rebut. Okay.
Sorry.
Please.
I'm sorry.
Go
The
ahead.
question was only for him.
No, you, yes.
Okay, so here's the deal. We talk about police brutality in Allentown. And I have said this before, we do not have a police brutality issue in Allentown. Let's be clear about that. I have been 26 years as a small business owner on 7th Street in Allentown. And I am what I am because of the police. No question about it. Just 7 days ago, a gentleman came over, 10 feet from my office, pulls a gun, boom, 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 and starts shooting. 7 days ago? What did we do? We called the police. What happened? The police came over. We have safety. I will do whatever I have to do to make sure the police have the resources it needs, whatever it takes, to make sure we are safe.
Thank you. Ms. Alva, we'll go down the line.
A lot like John, I owned a bar for 37 years, and without our police department, I couldn't survive 37 days. So I have to agree with him. And I think what happened in Whitehall, as what I was talking about, one of the things that they wanted to cut from our budget was overtime for police. And the overtime for police is training, training, and training. I don't think that officer from Whitehall was trained properly. Our city, our officers are trained properly. And I want to make sure of that. This is why I made sure there was no way that they were going to cut our police overtime. I was talking to the chief. This was the main thing they use it for, is training. And when you have trained police officers, like John said, they had my back, they have his back. But there are situations, sometimes, if they're not trained properly, tragedies can happen like it did in Whitehall.
Thank you. Mr. Hoffman.
I support the Allentown Police Department, point blank. I will say, though, that a police department to be its absolute best requires 3 levels of training. Allentown does very good in 2 of the 3, which is physical training through its police academy and sensitivity training through its human relations. The third thing that the police in this city need is economic training. Crime in this town is largely due to economic imbalances, whether it's drug crime or housing crime or business crime. It is due to people simply not having enough money. And if police are sensitized to that fact and know what to do
Mr.
about
Hoffman,
it,
we're going to have to leave it there.
Thank you, Mr. Robinson. Thank you, Mr. That's the way it goes, folks.
Thank you. We, as stated by several other members on the panel, we are lucky in Allentown. We have a police force that has done a lot of good, that has good relations with the community for the most part, but there's always room for improvement. There's always ways that we can do things better. There's always ways that we can look to do things differently. Training is one of the most important things that we can do. We're very lucky that we are one of the very few communities outside of the major cities of Pittsburgh and Philadelphia that has our own police academy. We actually train the majority of police officers in this area. So having that ability is important, making sure that we are diverting the correct amount of resources to that, and that we're also looking at new and unique styles of training for community engagement. That is something that's imperative and must be done hand in hand with an emphasis on greater relations with the community. Thank you.
Well, I think we should also take stock in the fact that just because something hasn't happened doesn't mean it can't happen. And let's face the reality in America. If you're an African American or Latino, you are between 9 and 16 times more likely to be killed by the cops. So just because it hasn't happened yet, doesn't mean it can't. Which means the best remedy is to be proactive. So it's been talked about, implicit bias training, absolutely. And having the police academy here in Allentown means we can have a absolutely adverse impact in the entire Lehigh Valley. And that officer from South Whitehall was trained. He was a military veteran, which means officers who often return from military service need de-escalation training. They need proper time to reassert themselves into the community. It's an entirely different style of policing. It's an entirely different lifestyle where you're overseas under constant fear of death. Moreover, what we also need to look at is crisis intervention teams. We know that Joey Santos was not only under the influence of narcotics, but likely had some severe mental distress. And as many as a third of police interactions involve mental illness. So we need to make sure that our officers are not just better trained and equipped, but understand how to identify those things to prevent the unnecessary loss of life.
Thank you. Ms. Gerlach.
So I think the first most important thing is for us to recognize none of us walk in each other's shoes. I don't know what it's like to be an African American male. I don't know what it's like to be a Latino male. I know what it's like to be a light-skinned mixed girl. That's my experience. As a light-skinned mixed girl, I have not experienced police brutality, but that does not mean it does not exist in the city of Allentown. Yes, to answer those questions you asked for the mayors, potential mayors, implicit bias training, yes. I also believe some type of trauma-informed de-escalation training mandated every single year so that they have to update on a yearly basis. Mental health training, and then also, no one's mentioned our homeless population to make sure they're not being targeted, how to work with someone who's experiencing homelessness.
Thank you. So, for the record, before you move on to we're kind of getting at our end of our time together, how many of you would favor implicit bias training for all officers? Show of hands. And how many of you would require a residency for all police officers in the city of Allentown? A residency requirement? It's not a litmus test.
It's contractual. It's not ordinance-based, it's in the contracts and has to be renegotiated.
Very good. And how about holding cops accountable for any violence that they commit? Show of hands. Very good. Thank you. This is a long question, so I'm going to prepare you for it, and we'll see who it gets directed to.
It'll have to be our last question.
And our last question? Very good. Oh, yes. It's been a lively conversation.
It wasn't as long as last year.
A great question to end on. Last year, the NIS Fund diverted $2.6 million of local property taxes to pay down debt on the PPL Center and private developments like 2 City Center and Tower 6. The year before it was $2.9 million that were diverted. Additionally, major downtown footprints like the PPL Center pay no property taxes, which on average could be worth $3 million to the school district, city, and county. The booming downtown puts additional stress on infrastructure like roads, sewers, and waste. Allentown residents are subsidizing private developers to build corporate high-rises and luxury restaurants. Despite this, poverty in the adjacent areas remains stubbornly high and has increased in some neighborhoods, including the one we're in. How will you ensure, if elected or if re-elected, how will you ensure that this massive subsidy starts to benefit all Allentown residents and not just the wealthy, privileged few? Who'd like to take the first crack at that? Ms. Gerlach.
Yeah, so I've actually been on the ground already fighting for this. Several years ago, before the arena opened, I was part of a resident-led group that was fighting for Allentown residents to get those jobs first before anyone else. So I've been part of that group. I've also been part of a resident-led group that has been fighting for community benefits. So for me, these are not new concepts, these are not new ideas. And for inclusionary zoning, there are over 500 inclusionary zoning ordinances already in place in the United States of America. This is workforce housing, and I believe it was in 2014 or 15, Goody Clancy, which is a study that the city paid millions of dollars for, actually calls for workforce housing. So we're not even following our own studies that we pay for.
Mr. Siegel.
Well, I think first and foremost, a community benefits agreement is the best means by which a community actually gets to determine the benefits that they derive from development. And that can come in the form of, for example, in the Hill District in Pittsburgh, the community determined that they needed a community center and a grocery store. It helped address a food desert, and it also gave children in the district a safe, habitable place where they could play, where they could be off the streets, where they could have a constructive learning environment. It's not up to me to determine what the community wants. It's my job as an elected official, or to be an elected official, to facilitate that environment and make sure that the community gets what they deserve, but they actually negotiate the process. I also think we have to look at the quality of jobs we bring into the district, because quantity of economic development doesn't matter if the quality of employment isn't keeping pace. So in a community benefits agreement, you have to stipulate that the jobs that these developers bring in pay a living wage, that they actually provide training so that the people can actually be pumped into the economy.
Very good. We'll go down the line. Mr. Robinson.
Thank you. So, first of all, there's actually a slight mistake in that. There's no property tax revenue that's diverted to the NIS. There are local taxes, but they are not property taxes. And when we look at the land that is in the NIS that has been developed, it is now generating around between $6 and $7 million in new revenue for the school district, the county, and the city. It's about $4 million for the school district, a little more, I think it is 4.1, just under $1 million for the city, and the remainder goes to the county. So there has been some benefit. There is also the opportunity and the ability through the Neighborhood Improvement Zone Board of Directors to invest money into infrastructure projects existing in NIDS. Some of that has happened, more of that needs to happen, and that's something where we can push the conversation and the agenda to make sure that those infrastructure investments are made.
Thank you.
One more correction, local non-property taxes and state property taxes.
Right, I'm just saying it was not just your local property taxes, that was my correction.
Sure.
Let's not use the PPL Center as a crutch for the mistakes that we are making as a population. We have many things to sort out and make right in this town for affordable housing, for help to the new Allentown majority that I am so committed to helping. Picking on one building out of 43,560 in Allentown is not the way to do it. You all know better. You know what solutions really need to be made, and you know how you have to push your elected officials to make those solutions.
Ms. Alpha.
Last night, Mr. Traub gave a presentation. He said something interesting, that when before NIS, we were paying the taxes, and the state was giving us back maybe 60%, maybe 50%. Now with the NIS, all the taxes, 100% are coming back into our city.
Thank you, Mr. Rosario.
We have given away the house. I will take a very close look at the contracts that we are underwriting in City Council right now. I paid a visit to City Council a couple of years ago just to find out that they were trying to rent a piece of equipment for $90,000. $90,000, I looked online, I could buy the equipment for $48,000. That is amazing, it's mind-boggling. I assure you one thing, if I get elected to City Council, some people will have to do a lot of explanations with this aye. Everybody in favor? Aye, 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 aye. I don't agree with myself twice. I don't agree with myself twice a day. I don't agree with myself twice a day. These people all agree on the same thing. 7 people. Last time I saw that was a Broadway show. This is not a Broadway show. Lives of people are at stake.
Thank you.
I am in the poor neighborhood of
Mr. Acevedo.
Well, I have to agree with John here. Last year, we were looking to spend $1.8 million in Nate Heyman's property to get it cleaned up and all. Got approved by City Council. Nate Heyman came in and said, that's only gonna cost me $250,000. Why there was a big difference in number? That's a huge number. I mean, something doesn't make sense to me. So I gotta agree with John. We have to look at what's going on inside City Council. We gotta find out where these numbers are coming out from. And we gotta make sure when the numbers go out, the numbers are right, it makes sense. Because 1.8 million and 250,000, that's a huge difference.
Very good. Thank you. Well, you all are very opinionated, and you have some very strong opinions and personalities, and I'm excited to see how you run your campaign. So your closing comments, and we have to keep it brief because we've been really good about time. In your closing statement, what's the one word? Now this is going to be hard to give a politician a mic and say one word. Let's see who is disciplined enough to follow it. But what's the one word that sets you apart from the rest of the folks sitting on that dais? Let's start with Ms. Gerlach.
Bold.
All right, we're gonna have to go with a synonym, audacious.
Open-minded.
Committed.
Experience and dedication.
It's like autocorrect on my computer. They just, that's 3 words. Yes, okay, yes. Mr. Rosario.
Honest.
And last but not least, Mr. Acevedo.
Surprising.
Surprising. Very good. Will you give all of our candidates a hand and thank them for coming out on this Thursday evening? We want to thank so much Ms. Gerlach, Mr. Siegel, Mr. Robinson, Mr. Hoffman, Mrs. Zaffa, Mr. Rosario, and Mr. Acevedo. Thank you all. Have a great night. And remember, if you're not registered to vote, there's some folks here who can register you to vote. Make sure you vote in the upcoming primary. Your voice and your vote matter to the city.